Hello, Clemente29 here, another Topic of the Week video. So, I did make a whole lot of topic videos in 2020. 2020 was kind of a crazy year, but I had actually intended, going into 2021, to just burn through the 40 or so topics I didn't get around to making. But that really stressed me out. Trying to just catch up with all of that, and that's not even getting into doing the topics for 2021, kind of made it a little difficult to make stuff. So I talked with some people in the Discord, and I ultimately decided to just leave it be. 2021 was crazy, we're moving past it, and so I'm just going to start off doing the topics for the weeks of 2021 and moving on from there. So, new year, new me, new shirt, and new topic. And this topic was submitted by Royal Joke Studios on YouTube, and their topic is, how much should the fans affect a story? Like, should their opinions affect the course of the story? I think not. Unless it's an instance where someone is making use of someone else's IP, like companies buying franchises, fanfictions, all that. So whenever this topic comes up of what kind of influence should fans have on a story, especially as a story that's currently ongoing, a lot of times I see this discussion be split into two extremes. Where on one side, it's, you just have to ignore all the fans, they're worthless, they don't matter, you ignore them, do whatever you want. Basically, you're Ryan Johnsons of the world, the ones who don't actually care about what the fans think, or care for the wrong reasons. And they just kind of do whatever they want. That's not good. But on the other end, what people think the only other option is just straight up pandering, where you just throw stuff in you think fans might like, change course of the stories, kill off characters, bring characters back, pair up characters, not anything that would make sense over the course of the story, or make sense with how the story has been written, but just being done because, this pairing is popular, what if we just threw these two characters together? That's never going to work. Especially if you do extreme stuff like, killing off a character or hooking up a pairing, not because it makes sense for it, like there's some development between the characters that it would make sense they'd get together, but just picking two characters that the fandom likes, and the fandom can have very questionable tastes when it comes to pairings, but just pairing them together just because, hey, this has a lot of fics on AO3, so clearly this is the right choice. And then, of course, it just makes no sense, and for the most part, you're just going to make one segment of the fandom happy. Look what happened with Rise of Skywalker trying to push Reylo. You pissed off everyone, except the Reylos, and then they pissed off the Reylos because they killed off Ben Swallow. But anyway, a lot of people think those two choices of either just complete rejection of the fans or an obsession with pleasing the fans that just eclipses any common sense. There are shades of gray in this scale here. It's not like you have to pick one side or the other side. Where especially a lot of people would say that they would pick the lesser of two evils of ignore the fandom over just pandering. Now, doing stuff for the fandom, letting the fandom have some influence on the progress of a story, is not a bad thing. There are a lot of times where stories have been affected for positively because of the fandom. A lot of people really liked Vegeta in Dragon Ball Z. Toriyama brought him back. He had strong positive reception with the fandom. And he kept bringing him back. And this ultimately led to what a lot of people consider to be the greatest redemption arc of all time. Of Vegeta going from, when he's introduced as a straight-up villain, to moving towards an anti-villain, to an anti-hero, to being on the actual side of good with the good guys. He's there for their stuff, even the comic relief. That's a pretty significant change, and If Vegeta wasn't brought back, then it never would have happened. In Avatar: The Last Airbender, one of the best examples of this is actually Suki, a character who, in the first season, was just there for a one-off episode. She was there to help Sokka grow a little bit, and then after that, she was just a one-off character. It's not like they were going to go back to Kyoshi Island a whole bunch of times and see her. But she was so popular that they brought her back in Season 2 for a few appearances, and then, again, brought her back in Season 3. Now, if the creators of Avatar: The Last Airbender, when they were writing the show, if they decided to just not listen to anything in the fandom at all, then we never would have gotten Suki to come back. And we never would have gotten the wonderful relationship that was Sokka and Suki. That was great, not just for Sokka's development as a character, but it's just a really sweet relationship. Now, I don't like the idea of shutting the fans out. Especially because these people are investing their time in a series. And, obviously, not really just talking about fan fiction, but obviously, fan fiction, you have an audience. That is something to consider. But that's not really as important as stuff that's being made, that's being consumed by a general audience, that's being paid for. People are buying paying for watching the show, buying books, whatever kind of series it is, buying video games, people are invested in the series. Then, I feel like it's kind of rude and condescending if a creator straight up says, I'm not going to listen to any of y'all. I'm going to do whatever I want. Now, as a writer myself, I absolutely understand the need and desire to do your own thing. Now, obviously, I know what that feels like. I come up with a story and I want to tell this story. But writers aren't perfect. No one is. And sometimes the writers can get good influence from the audience. Sometimes the writer makes a big misstep. And they need to realize, I messed up. The fans really didn't like that. And that can happen a lot. Sometimes you write a character and you think, everyone's going to love this character. They're going to want me to pair them up with this person. Everything's going to be great, only for everyone to just hate the character. And then you're sitting there like, huh. At that point, you kind of need to do a little course correction of realizing, why did I not like him? Sort of analyze it. Are these reasons valid? Okay, this isn't just stupid nonsense like, oh, you didn't make the character gay, so they're bad, or you didn't pair them up with this right character, so it's bad. But it's like, it's legitimate problems of, didn't think about that. And sometimes you have some unfortunate implications with how you write that you may not have thought about. Stuff that you can look at from the audience's reaction. A good example of this is actually in Stranger Things Season 2. Now, Stranger Things Season 2 is pretty good. But there's one episode that's really bad. It's horrible. It's one where Eleven goes off on some random side quest adventure and meets a bunch of other misfits, and one of them is someone else who was experimented on, the same experiment group stuff, conspiracy, whatevers. And it's not an enjoyable story. Now, first of all, it completely wrecks the pacing of the season, where you have everything building up to the conclusion at the end of the finale of Season 2. Everything is slowly building up to this climax, and then you go off somewhere else for this story, and then coming back, and then it builds up. In fact, after watching the Season 2, I went back and rewatched it, but skipped that episode, and it flowed so much better. Even when Eleven comes back, when she's dressed up totally differently, it's so much more entertaining to just leave that as some noodle incident that you don't know what happened on her way back, but something happened. Because the story that we got is, he could have had potential, but it was the wrong place to put it. And a lot of those characters that were in that episode were bland at best and just annoying at worst. So you have all these other characters that are shoved in your face, like, look at this whole crew, look how cool they are, and they're gonna be like a whole gang, and like, you just don't care. The creators of Stranger Things wisely decided to just shove that to the side. No one wanted to see these characters again, no one really wanted a spin-off featuring them, and they saw the audience reaction and were like, let's not do that. Now, I'm not saying that fans should always influence stuff. Obviously, I'm not saying that whatever the fandom decides should go. Obviously not. But what I am saying is the creator should be open to letting the fans influence it. Do some fan service. Now, there is a difference between fan service and pandering. Fan service is, and I'm not talking about big titties waifu fan service. I'm talking about like actual fan service. Service for the fans. Of, hey, let's give some more attention to this really popular character who appeared once before. Or let's acknowledge maybe a fandom meme. And sometimes it can be a little bit more significant, like pairing up certain characters. That's something you gotta be careful with, because just pairing up characters randomly can go horribly wrong if handled improperly. But if there's some sense to those characters getting together, and maybe pushing them together because the fans like them, without being too distracting, that could work. But you gotta be careful with it, because it can dip into pandering. Pandering is very different from fan service. Fan service is stuff that's like, hey, here's something that the fans would like. Suki coming back in Book 2 of Avatar: The Last Airbender is fan service. People really liked her characters, so they brought her back. Simple as that. But they didn't go there and focus a whole bunch of episodes on her. They didn't dedicate half the season to her character. That would have been pandering, because there's so much more stuff going on in the show than just one popular side character. But giving her a couple of appearances in a few episodes, making her important for, one episode, it's not that big of a deal. It's just bringing back a character that fans liked. And actually, they managed to incorporate her in a pretty organic way, where it doesn't feel like they changed any plans for this. It feels like it was worked in naturally. And that's an important thing about, letting fans influence. The stuff has to feel natural. You can't just do it just for the sake of it. Again, that's pandering. And to be perfectly honest, who is this for but for the fans? If you're making a series and you have fans, acknowledging that you have fans is not a bad thing. Rejecting them is not an inherently good thing. You can have your story and tell the story you want to tell, while also doing stuff for the fans. And sometimes it can be small stuff. It doesn't always have to be big dramatic stuff. It could literally just be, hey, this one character who appeared before gets to come back a little and just do something to help out later on. It really does come down to the writers knowing what to do. And this actually applies to a lot of stuff. Like, when you get criticism, you gotta be able to parse through this and say, okay, as a writer, I need to understand that this stuff's not important. Complaining that this character didn't get with this character, even though these characters have never interacted ever, is not valid criticism. But if someone pointed out that I had completely messed up continuity on something, that's something I need to look at, something I need to figure out how to address, or do something to fix. And it's definitely important for the writer to be able to parse through that stuff. And this applies to stuff in the fandom too. Not everything in the fandom is worth keeping. I want to be perfectly honest here. I have been in a lot of fandoms over the years, and I've seen internet fandoms for stuff, and while there's a lot of good, there's also a lot of bad. I mean, there's sometimes where characters, the versions of characters that the fandom comes up with are sometimes just these extraordinarily ridiculous versions where characters who are, awkward and shy are turned into suave ladies' men who can bed any woman, and even though it's completely out of character for them. Or characters who are generally pretty competent and smart are reduced to a single joke that maybe came from an offhanded line they mentioned one time. and then all of a sudden the fandom just revolves their entire character around this one trait. That stuff, as a writer, you just leave out. You don't touch that stuff. You let the fandom have their fun. They do their thing, right? They do their thing. But if there's something that you see that a fans really like this character, giving them a little bit more attention. And maybe these two side characters who you didn't really plan much for, maybe they like them together. Maybe this is something super duper popular with the characters. And you might go, well, maybe they could. Maybe you might leave it open that they might get together or something like that. Sometimes you may decide to change your story because of how fans like stuff. And making changes to the story that you have in mind isn't inherently a bad thing. I know a lot of writers get really stuck with this idea that they just really love. They have this idea. I know it. I've been in there, and I've actually had friends, when I'm bouncing off ideas, shoot down ideas that I thought were amazing because ultimately they didn't work. Some of them sounded great, but in reality didn't work. Being able to take that criticism, being able to take that influence, and make changes to the story, that's an important skill for a writer. And a version of that applies to the fandom. And understanding what you can do as a treat to the fandom, especially for people who have been investing in this in the beginning and have stuck around and have been either reading every chapter or buying every book or buying every game or watching every single episode of whatever it is. Doing stuff for the fans, that's nice. Fans really appreciate it, even if it's small stuff. Just doing stuff here and there. Yeah, you can just sprinkle it in. Now, you can. It's perfectly fine to do the story you want to tell without trying to interact too much with the fandom. But it shouldn't be because of an attitude of, oh, I'm too good for those plebeians. I will tell them what they want. No one appreciates attitudes like that. And unfortunately, there are creators who have that attitude of, oh, I'm just so much better than you. I can do whatever I want. And it's like, at that point, why are you even creating? Right? Like, we're not just talking about writing a fan fiction. We're talking about like an actual production, stuff for fans, stuff that you presume people would be investing their money into. You're making a product. And this is actually the approach that I take when I'm writing stuff, is I always want to take into account of how the audience would react. And I think this is why whenever I do like rewrites of stuff, like I focus on stuff that, fans would appreciate. Not just writing a story, but writing a story that the people who are reading it or watching it or playing it would also really like. And there's sometimes when people invest in for years and years only to have a character who suffered for years and years, just like maybe they attain a tiny bit of happiness and then die. And then people are really upset. And then you go, well, you should just, stop caring or something stupid like that. No. Like, do stuff that fans would like. And I'm generally a fan of happy endings, and especially the earn your happy ending varieties. So whenever I create stuff, I like, what are stuff that fans would like? What are stuff that fans would appreciate? Throwing nods to the fandom, but also writing a story where the characters get respected, because that's what a lot of people like. It's why you see people getting angry at stuff like The Last Jedi, or The Last of Us Part 2, or Game of Thrones Season 8, or stuff like that, where the characters are just totally disrespected. And one of the reasons why I feel kind of intense about this is I remember reading this one person's sort of like comment about RWBY Volume 3. And I've talked about RWBY in the past before. And Volume 3 was an absolute dumpster fire of horrid writing. There's like next to nothing of value in that entire season. But one of the worst parts about it is that it took a generally lighthearted series and just tipped it straight into grimdark territory. And a story where beloved, super popular characters are just getting killed off, one by one, and then nothing, the good guys can't win. All the good guys suck, they lose, they die, everyone's miserable, the bad guys win, they just kill a bunch of people, and that's how it ends. Everyone is miserable and sad. And it's a terrible season because it not only is badly written, but it's also really disrespectful to the fans of, hey, you invested in this series and up to now has been pretty lighthearted. Well, screw you, we're just going to kill off characters and not really have any plan of what we're going to be doing about this. We just wanted to be all dark and serious. But this one comment I read of this person who was watching RWBY since the beginning, and they talked about how they were really depressed and how they were in a bad place in their life. And they watched RWBY, and it was something that was a bright spot for them. It was something that really gave them hope, and it was an escape from the misery in their life. So, up to volume 1 and 2, it was always something that they could go to. It's like an emotional happy place. But then volume 3 came along. It was nihilistic. It treated the characters bad. It killed a bunch of characters off for no reason. And this person talked about how that made their depression worse. That getting invested in these characters that they cared about, only to see them just pointlessly killed off, it really screwed with them. Like, it really messed them up, like, emotionally. And of course, the RWBY fandom, being as classy as ever, mocked and insulted this person for their depression, because how dare they not worship the show. But reading that comment left a big impact on me, because I think a lot of creators don't really realize this, of when you look at the story as a creator, you're looking at this from a lot of ways a mechanical place. It's very detached. You see all the moving pieces, but a lot of times you don't see everything as zoomed in as the audience does, because the audience is seeing whatever you're portraying. You may have this elaborate backstory for all these other characters that is never explained. Tolkien certainly did. But, you kind of, as a writer, will be detached from a lot of the emotions of stuff. And I know this. I've come up with a lot of stories that, in hindsight, I was like, it's not as good, but it was something that I was, like, being all experimental about at the time. But when you switch your perspective from as the writer to as the audience, things look a little different. And this actually has become a standard part of my writing process. Whenever I write the story, I think about the mechanicals. I think about the how things work in the story, the lore, the world, the characters, the character arcs, the way they develop, the way they interact with each other, yada yada yada, all the moving pieces, the stuff that sounds really boring to a lot of people, of how the story works. Like, that's my bread and butter. That's what a lot of writers really enjoy, is the construction and building of this world and the characters. And sometimes you're like, alright, I'm going to plan to kill off a character here, and then I'm going to kill a character there, and I'm going to do this and that, and whatever. And as a writer, you may not think about how the audience would react. But when you shift your perspective, and you look at this just from what you're presenting to the audience, and sometimes I'll do that in my own work, and I'm thinking, okay, but why did I kill off that character? I think, like, if I was watching this, I would be pissed off at the writing decision that I came up with. Because I was coming up with that decision detached from the idea of an audience. But then I look at this as an audience member, and I think, how would they like this? And I realize there's some stuff, and I'm like, that's just kind of miserable. Like, that's kind of pointless. Why do we spend time on this if this goes nowhere? And stuff that seemed like it was an interesting exploration at the time ends up feeling like it's wasting the audience's time. And that's another thing that, when it comes to creating a story, that I think a lot of creators really do need to keep in mind. of the perspective of the audience. It's not just, like, I've seen so many writers who basically tell the audience, you're supposed to care about this, this, and this. You're not supposed to care about this other stuff that you care about, because that's not what I care about. It's like when you had the writers for Lost after the finale was a big FU to everyone, and they were like, what's important isn't the mysteries that everyone has been invested in for years to get answers to. It's actually the characters. And it's like, you don't get to tell me what we're invested in. You've seen this for years that we want to know what's going on in the mysteries. So I don't like that attitude from a writer. You know, a lot of writers, I do think, need to keep in mind the perspective of the audience. And I think, you know, whenever I write something, I do think, what would the audience think? And there have been times in the writing process for a story that I've changed significant events because I realized the way it was done was stupid. The way that this was done would make the fandom groan, like, oh, that's stupid, you know, whatever. And, you know, you killed off this character who didn't need to die because, you know, their death doesn't affect anything else going on in the rest of the story, so why does it happen? And they sit there and I'm asking myself these questions like, yeah, why did it happen like that? So, not just, you know, as the story is ongoing to accept, you know, influence from the fans when appropriate, but it's also something when you're just writing the story outright, write something that, you know, people would like. Because many times if you're making a product, if you're making something you expect people to be putting money into, buying stuff, buying merch, buying, you know, games, buying books, whatever, then you have to sell a product. And you can make a good, well-written story and sell that as a product. Not everything needs to be, you know, avant-garde and weird, you know, metaphorical stuff. You know, you can put together a good, decent story that people will like. There's nothing wrong with that. It's, honestly, I think the best thing to do. You know, you make a story that's good, entertaining, well-written, but also one that appeals to a lot of people. That people can get invested in, and by the end of the story, feel satisfied. And not feel like they wasted their time. You know, like everything else with writing, it takes experience, and it takes work to figure this out, and how this works, and how people would react to stuff. You know, it takes work. There's a lot of stuff in writing that just takes work. And, you know, coming back to the original topic in its, you know, entirety, no, I don't think that the fans should be locked out from having an influence on the story unless, you know, certain, you know, requirements are met. I do think that fans should have, you know, influence on the story. At the writer's discretion, of course, and done in a proper way. Obviously, no pandering, just fan service, and sometimes, if you change the story, you know, more significantly to appease, and sometimes if you change the story more significantly for the fans, as long as you're doing it in a good way that oftentimes improves the story instead of making it worse, you know, you can do that. Just don't do it carelessly. There's so much with writing that you can't explain it. It just becomes a thing you figure out. This is something you gotta figure out. You gotta get a feel for it. You gotta understand how to make this work. And some writers are better at it than others. And some writers might be better off just not letting, you know, fandoms influence them. Some work really well with playing off fandoms and doing stuff that people would like. And a lot of times it comes down to figuring out what works best for you as the writer, and really what works best with the fandom. But again, it's something you gotta figure out. Well, I think that's it for this topic. So if you want to submit a topic to me, you can comment below if you're on YouTube. If you're on Tumblr, send me an ask and put topic, and then whatever topic you want me to talk about. Or if you're on the Discord, you can go to the topic submissions channel and submit a topic there. So what do you think? Do you think fans should have an influence on the story, whether it be small or major? Please comment below. And thank you for watching.